asking some advanced questions, by the way.
Who knows what will happen? I'll probably pivot during the meeting just to see how the conversation goes, because I'm sure there'll be provocative thoughts. So I think you bring the most tenure into the equation. So I think
That's a nice way to say it. I like that.
All right, mic check. Okay, right. Let's reconvene. I hope everyone had a good lunch. The networking is awesome. Congrats again to the Shift team and our hosts for organizing this kind of a summit. I don't think I've seen anything like this in the Beltway, as we call it. This crowd's also very interesting. I think I've noticed a lot of investors, founders, people that don't normally understand some of the nuances of working in not just the defense industry, but with federal as a customer. And I think this panel will do an excellent job to bring some diversity around their personal anecdotes and some lessons to take away for others that are looking to kind of take a page out of their book and look at winning some government defense business. So with that, our information's in the panel. My name is Van. I'm a venture capitalist that does some consulting for the DoD. And our panelists, I'll quickly kind of let them, maybe like 2-second introduction, each of you just kind of share your background and what you're working on now.
Hey guys, I'm Matt. I lead up a really incredible group of folks at Merlin where we're building a pilot, just not a human one, working really closely with the Air Force on enabling a pretty realistic path to the autonomous end state, starting with 2 pilots down to 1, and then eventually uncrewed flight.
Hey, I'm Anand Kulkarni. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Crowdbotics. We are an AI-powered software development platform. DoD is our biggest customer right now, primarily building software for flight analysis using AI, real-time data analysis about human performance, airframe performance, and more. We're scaling up fast inside the DoD.
Yeah, hey, I'm Gerald Goodfellow. I'm the CEO of this small business consulting corporation, a company I started about 2.5 years ago after I retired from the Air Force that actually helps bring what I'll say the best technologies to the major commands in the Air Force. Before that, I was the head of what they call the A58 at Global Strike Command, so I was the requirements guy, so I decided what stuff we needed to buy, and the programming guy, which means I went and got the money to buy it. Before that, I had a real hand in getting AFWERX going in the Air Force. If you read the history, you'll say I'm the general officer champion that got it going. And so I had a lot of experience working with companies that delivered on time, on budget, on capability. When I was working with the AFWERX founders and the companies they were working with, and then when I became the 5/8 at Global Strike Command, and I'm working with the big primes, I about 99% of the programs were either not on time, not on budget, or not on capability. In many cases, all 3 of those. I thought I knew by the end of that job what the Air Force needed to do different, so I started a company. And we're doing some things different that I think is very valuable to the MAGCOMs. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Raj Sharma. I'm the CEO and founder of Public Spend Forum. Public Spend Forum is a deep market and tech intelligence platform. Basically, we're covering emerging tech sectors that government is focused on, and specifically bringing public sector insights. So in terms of what are the use cases being invested in? What types of technologies? Where is that money going? What companies are investable? What does the commercialization funnel look like? Previously, I ran a strategy consulting firm with a lot of, so I bring that background to the table.
So there you have it. You've got 2 founders that are winning with the DoD. They've got the battle bruises, the black eyes, and how to win contracts, what contract instruments to go after, and you've got the sort of experts that have been on the inside and seen how to allocate where money goes, what are non-traditional businesses, what are existing vendors, and how they go and invite kind of new contenders to kind of support these programs. Just want to get a sense of the audience. Maybe I can get a quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with DD 2254? This is my way of trying to realize, like, have you actually worked in the classified arena before, and have you gone through the administrative paperwork to be compliant with talking to a DoD customer and really understanding their needs? And I think that's an interesting way that there's a lot of people that haven't necessarily had that traction before. And we're seeing a lot of marketing from DoD network around, you mentioned AFWorks, the Defense Innovation Unit, and now dedicated campaigns from VCs that are supporting American dynamism. When you see all this noise, how are each of you kind of going through that, navigating that to basically identify contracts that you can support the technology development, but actually revenue in your business? So maybe I'd like to hear it from a founder perspective, and then maybe how you're supporting kind of entrepreneurs in that regard.
Yeah, I think when we're looking at the DoD, I think when any of the companies hopefully here are looking at working with the DoD, is identifying the capability and what we're solving for the warfighter and what we're solving as sort of a capability for sort of the nation, and then working backwards from there. I think oftentimes we sort of flip it in a way that's super harmful, in where the government comes out and says, hey, here's this very, very specific capability that we're looking for. But that capability is not necessarily informed by the best of what the private sector is able to go do. So for the DoD folks in the room and for the folks who are working in those orbits, really trying to think first of a sort of a broad capability, and then putting that thesis out into the market, and then getting some feedback from companies like us to be able to go solve that potentially in a different way than was originally conceived. And I think that's really how we start to be able to go work well together. There's clearly a contracting vehicle problem. There's clearly a bureaucracy problem. But I think that's actually secondary to really a requirement setting process and a shift in how the DoD sets requirements and partners with industry to go set those requirements, because that's what leads to the big programmatic dollars for us and for others.
Anand?
Yeah, it's actually a terrifically challenging problem in 3 levels. I break it out in 3 steps for what we've faced as entrepreneurs in attacking a DoD market. The first is probably the biggest one, understanding problem discovery. Can you find an actual warfighter who can articulate the issues that they are facing well enough that you can understand if there's technology that you can create or adapt to solve that problem? And there was no substitute there for boots on the ground, going and spending time talking to actual folks in the bases, not going through the actual necessarily published requirements, but actually meeting people who are starting up programs or trying to launch initiatives and saying, what do you actually think is possible with technology that you are willing to support or look at? The second one, of course, is can you actually get past the hurdles and the bureaucracy that enable you to create that technology? So classification of data and making sure you're compliant is one of them that you have to solve for early, and that takes a lot of persistence and willingness to slog through, but also a buyer who's motivated enough to help you shepherd through that process. And then finally, contracting, which is still the part that is getting the most attention, but which is the trickiest for a lot of new companies. Once you have enough of a problem that you're solving, though, for an end customer, everything else falls into place. And that's the part that is really the key, is if you are truly solving a problem for the warfighter at scale, you can get a lot of the other stuff done if you are willing to be persistent enough.
Gerald and Raj, we've talked about identifying the warfighter and the problems, but maybe a little bit more on like that stack of what a PEO is, how to go through that journey of like identifying the relevant program that your technology could be matched to.
Yeah, so I'll cover both questions in a roundabout way here. But Van, do you have any, let me ask you if you know what the Air Force, I'll just speak for the Air Force, is really bad at.
Bad at what?
Well, I'll tell you what they're tough question, because there's many things they're good at, there's many things they're bad at, but they're really bad at describing their problem, right? And we're even in the, this is why we have this big requirements process that says, okay, here's all the things we need to solve, and to solve this, you're going to do all these things, and the primes love it because it tells them every single thing that they're expected to do. But when you're working with, say an innovative company that isn't one of the big primes, and you tell them to describe their problem, they have a hard time with it. One of the things they do bad is we tell young officers and young enlisted people, smart people from the time they're very young, we say, hey, don't talk to industry, don't talk to contractors. You may inadvertently obligate the government. So we got a cultural problem. That's one of the things that we're solving in the MAGCOMs we're working with, right? I tell everybody First of all, nobody's ever given me one example, and I've asked 400 or 500 contracting and acquisition officers to give me one example of somebody who has actually inadvertently obligated the government. Hey, if any of you know anybody that's done it, please see me after this brief because I want to hire that person, okay? Because if that person can inadvertently obligate the government, something I try to do every day, and it's really hard, I want that person on my team, right? But they're really bad at describing what their problems are. Okay, so I work with the government, so I describe it in a way that we can take them to industry and we can tell industry, here's a problem, it's trying to be solved. And that works out pretty good because we'll go out and tech scout the right companies and bring those companies back to talk to the military. But I'll tell you what, all the time we have companies that say, I've got this great technology, it's going to solve X, Y, or Z, and they want to show it to us. And I say, that is great technology. Now, what's the use case here in, say, Global Strike Command or in Air Mobility Command? And they give me this look like, oh, I don't know what problem this is going to solve for you, right? And so it's really interesting. It's kind of this dual-edged sword where sometimes, and so we'll spend a lot of time working with the company when we think there's something there. But getting to a true use case that the military is willing to pay for, it's not as easy as you would think, on either side of it, actually.
Raj, like Gerald speaks the language of DoD, can help startups come in. How do you invite some of the founders today to actually overcome all these different gateways and say, here's the right pathway for you to get in?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer, but I do think there's a lot of education to be had. But going back to the very first part of the problem here, finding the use case. So before we find there's too much focus a lot of times on the contracting or procurement process, as opposed to finding those customers that have the problem sets and the use cases. So from the way we're looking at it and the way we're advising is really a lot of times we start off, for instance, a lot of innovation programs that are really bringing in a lot of companies at the seed level, let's say, early on. We're not at the same time looking at what are those programs that those technologies get adopted by, right? So we have the initial use case. So the way we're looking at it, so I'll give you an example, one specific one, preventive maintenance, right? Preventive maintenance is a specific type of problem. Now the use cases differ depending on the context and where you're applying it, right? So we would say if your technology is in some cases, in some types of use cases, addressing preventive maintenance, then where are those types of use cases? Now finding that information is not that, like you were saying, it's buried, right? Sometimes it's not defined as a problem. So we're really looking at it as a big data and AI type of problem. So we're applying really large language models to pull out information on use cases. So for instance, we can tell you preventive maintenance is one of the key use cases that's being addressed with AI-based predictive technology right now, as an example. And take another one, NOAA, weather, pollution tracking, right? How do you find that and that specific use case? So you have to dig through the documents, but there is a way to start to go back and look at both programmatic documents as well as, we would say, historical records and find that information. So I'm not sure if that simplifies it, but I think this is where the big data answer comes, because in any small company, there's no way it's possible to do that at scale. So
I like that you use the word use cases, because we hear the term dual use thrown around a lot. We're hearing the sort of defense unicorn narrative. So a lot of companies are thinking, I know the use case I want to pursue is specifically for an offensive capability, and the Pentagon has to buy my tech. Maybe you guys can highlight some of your experiences of thinking, what's your version of dual use? How are you thinking about go-to-market? How are you thinking about that product market fit from your technology capability side?
I think there's very few companies that build just for the DoD and achieve any meaningful venture scale. I think it's just really, really hard. I think there's going to be a couple that do it. Anduril is sort of one example that's probably going to break out. But any company that's building just for the DoD, I think that's a really difficult, if not impossible path to be able to, at least in the venture environment, achieve that venture scale and achieve that venture breakout. The DoD is just too unpredictable of a customer and too long of a cycle sort of the customer. So one of the things that we've done at Merlin, our objective is to build a pilot. We're working primarily in the civil world to be able to go build that. The DoD tapped us and said, hey, can you adapt what you're building for the DoD market, which has been a tremendous partnership for us. We're spending more than anyone in the world right now in developing autonomy for sort of a prime DoD use case. But the DoD is able to go bring those venture-backed dollars against a core mission while enabling us to be able to go continue on with our sort of core technology journey. But that's where sort of that product market fit with the DoD is super important, because the things that work are things where it solves a real need, where it likely saves the DoD some money, because once again, every new program dollar comes at the expense of something else, especially in this budget cycle. So if we're able to go deploy technology that eventually saves the DoD some money and delivers the capability, that's super important. And if we can do that in a way where there's also a civil non-DoD use case for that, that's where there's real value. Instead of a lot of these companies that are out there, I think right now, putting way too much water in the bucket of, hey, the DoD is going to be my only and biggest customer because I've developed this great thing and the DoD is going to buy it. Maybe, right? But I think that the road is littered with, sort of where that's really gone wrong.
Something I love about the Defense Venture Fellowship programs is that the acquisition officers and other rising executives in that purchasing process go into the commercial world and they get to see the sort of decision process for commercial investments. Anand, maybe you can share a little bit more about how you've used DoD to continue to unlock more commercial focus. Are you commercially focused and mission aware, or are you mission focused? Like, maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when we started Crowdbotics, this was 7 years ago, right? So, defense tech, from a VC perspective, was hard to sell, and it would have been difficult for us to say, honestly, that we were going to go purely for a defense focus. So we started on the commercial side, and we scaled up really most quickly initially with commercial customers before trying and knocking on a lot of doors to get into the DoD. And of course, once we made it through, we were able to scale up fairly quickly and identify mission outcomes there that mattered, and port some of those back into the civilian commercial world as well. But the key to having both of those businesses running was that the commercial side of the business scales independently of the defense side of the business. And as a VC-backed business, if you're trying to deliver growth, returns, continued progress, and traction, it is important to make sure that you can survive through the ups and downs of a procurement process or a procurement cycle to the point when you're at the end state. So for us, we've seen that the synergy that happens when you have both of those running at scale is really good. Like, modules that we produce inside DoD often find big value inside our commercial customers, and we're deployed alongside many of the same technologies inside DoD as we are out in the civilian world. But you have to be aware of the complementary nature, and you've got to look at both, especially if you're looking at a VC-backed organization, simply because it is a long process to get in the door, and you have to make sure that you're commercially viable independently of that.
Gerald, have you seen challenges there when you help? You found companies crushing it on the commercial sector, and you're like, this needs to come into this MAGCOM.
Yeah.
Like, how have you seen painful experiences of them trying to make it work for a defense use case?
It's kind of interesting. I think the true dual-use company that you find, and they're crushing it out there, and they're looking to bring their tech into the military, those seem to be the easier companies actually to work with, believe it or not. But at the same time, you'll run into a company that's got some tech, and they're very early or whatever, and then they've got some kind of government contract. Let's say they got a SBIR phase 2, and they've got $1 million and a half to work on the technology. It's the most money they've seen maybe forever. And boom, they really start to shift to where the money is. I've never found a company that has some technology that's really going to help the military that isn't interested in working with the military. I haven't found that company yet. They're all interested, right? And but then they start shifting to the military, and I think the military should embrace that. To tell you the truth, I mean, some company that's like leading in AI or whatever they happen to be doing. And now they want to work now they want to put a whole bunch of their energy and their resources, their brain power, everything towards the military. The military should embrace it. But I'm here to tell you, it's it's hard for the military to embrace it because it's a money thing. It's a zero-sum game every year, right? Every year, theoretically, the U.S. military starts out, budgeted. They're not, and so, but it's money they budgeted for 2 years ago.
I want to reemphasize this for everyone. Like, the people not in the crowd today are your, what we call the Beltway bandits. Like, these are your traditional primes, your CETA providers that get stop orders when there's a government, when the government freezes. They have to tell their people, go home, you can't go to work today, and we're not going to pay you.
Right.
Talk about how this works.
So we'll talk about this. So all of a sudden, you bring in the best technology. We were talking something in the green room earlier about this. You bring in a technology, and we're really interested in it. Okay. Now the question is where's the money to even bring you on? Now what's interesting is we probably can go get you a SIBR, or we can go find some R&D money in one of the labs, or we can peel a little bit off of some program and get you what I call easy research and development money. And given enough time, I can probably get you even some longer term, maybe a TAC 5, 2 years of R&D money. I always call the R&D money, believe it or not, easy money, right? Or maybe I get you 4 years of easy money, but at some point, that money is going to be gone. There's no more of that kind of money for you. They can only keep it on a technology for so many years, and you're going to hit a point where you need long-term money. And if you don't get it, you're not going to move. You're not going to move forward in the government. So it's really important that if you're one of these people that is early on and the government seems really interested, you need to be figuring out. You need to be asking questions like, "Hey, is there a long-term money plan here?" We use the term POM. Is it going to be in the POM? Is somebody going to bring this? And is there somebody in the government that supported this versus? And believe it or not, we talk a lot about I love the last panel, by the way, young guys in their military careers that are really making it happen. But I'm here to tell you, those young guys, it actually is, believe it or not, general officers that make funding decisions. And so if in the end you're counting on some captain or major to bring you the money, I'm telling you, he's not going to bring you long-term money unless a general officer has decided he's going to bring you one. And so if the only, which is great when you've got a really motivated captain or major who's trying to bring it to you, but he better be talking to the people that or the people that will talk to the people that are going to approve long-term money.
I want to emphasize that. Different services have different material commands which own the purse strings, and every year that changes. And every few years, the people in charge of where that money goes also changes.
Yep.
How do you help advise companies, or how have you as the founders deciphered this endless maze of what color of money, what contract vehicle? I'm told SIBR, I'm told OTA. It depends on what that program officer wants, what their flavor of the day is. How do you invest the time and energy to deal with that in your business that's just got too much stuff going on?
Are you asking? Who are you asking?
Anyone, yeah.
I'll just, sorry, go ahead.
Please go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's one, there's different kind of pots of money even in R&D, for instance, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we hear, for instance, a lot of talk about SIBRs. SIBRs is great, but that's at the end of the day a very tiny amount of money, right? So there's, by our estimation, there's upwards of $500 billion over the past 5 years invested just in R&D dollars, right? And that's not a small number. And so knowing by not just kind of certain kind of broad categories, but knowing what types of use cases, those R&D, and what stage of the life cycle, right? Even kind of as you move up the TRL levels, let's say, and that might not be something that others know, but basically it's your technology maturation cycle, right? As you move up that, what types of money comes in? That's one. Second big mistake I think we see, I'm not sure if you see this, is you get some R&D money, and then there's a big celebration, and you start focusing on that, right? But then you forget about that it takes a little while, even if there are other pots of money, or to be able to really talk to the general officers and build that use case well done. So starting that process pretty quickly and knowing where those possibilities are, it's a really important thing to do right away. Here's what I'll tell you. We'll talk money and contract, since that's really the question you're asking. Here's what I tell people all the time. Early money is easy. Yeah. Contracting vehicles are hard. Long-term money
is hard. And finding a contracting officer that can actually work through working with a new company and getting them on, whatever the right vehicle is. I don't care if it's a SIBR, I don't care if it's an OTA, I don't care if it's a standard FAR contract, I don't care what it is. That's the hardest thing of all, to tell you the truth, And I think it's really hard because we have contracting officers. I don't care if it's at a program office where all the big contracting goes on in the Air Force, or it's down at a base level and they're just running base level contracts. They're all busy, right? And then you come in and say, hey, I love the tech of this guy's company and I want to put him on this contract and here's the money. Contract officers, whoa, you're going to put another rock in my rucksack? And oh, by the way, I have no idea. This is so different from anything I've ever done. It seems really risky to me, right? And I don't mean to offend any contracting officers here. In fact, I talked to 2 yesterday who I'm sure don't fall into this category. But as a career field, I believe the riskiest group of people I know of in the military are contracting officers, right? They're really risk adverse, and they say, look, I'm governed by FARs, I'm governed by regulations, there's things that will get me into real trouble, so I don't want to take any risks, so they don't. So the getting that all right is tough.
Just to clarify, FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, so it's basically a ridiculous playbook that's like 1,000 pages long.
Yeah.
And then there's non-FAR procurement instruments that help you get there.
Yeah.
Maybe Matt, you want to dive in? You're awfully. I can sense the shivers of like this.
No, I mean, it's just this is just sort of the same conversation that we continue to have, right? Like over and over and over again. There's this weird, perverse incentive structure that's starting to really develop in the DoD, where you have a bunch of different folks around the DoD who are incentivized to be able to go say, hey, look, here's this cool new innovation that I brought into the DoD. And then they're done. They get paid their consulting fee, they get paid, they get promoted, whatever. But that is not, and those companies then go out to the venture community and then go say, hey, look, I have a real demand signal from the DoD. And then at the next round of financing, they go, oh, never mind, I actually didn't.
As a VC, I can tell you I've seen identified programs, not even...
100%.
Yeah.
So what happens then is the venture capital community goes, the Department of Defense is actually not a good counterparty, right, to sort of innovation. The people who create sort of the innovation theater around this have all achieved their mission, right? They've brought like things into the DoD and they've said like, hey, look, here's this interesting thing. But what that does is in all of that noise, it drowns out the signal. It drowns out the signal of what the warfighter actually needs. It drowns out the signal of what we actually need to be doing to be able to go meet this competitive threat, because we're all sitting in a room, we're all sitting here and saying, hey, look, we have an innovation problem. But the innovation problem is not a lack of good ideas. The innovation problem is not a lack of people who are really trying hard in the government. People are trying really hard in the government. The innovation problem is actually doing less. Do less. Focus on the things that actually matter. Focus on the things that actually deliver a peer competitive fight into the Chinese, into our other near peer competitive threats, and get rid of all this theater around innovation and AI. And this, we can't keep doing this. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough time to be doing this. As we're sitting here going through this process year after year after year, patting ourselves on the back, our competitors are silently putting first downs on the field as we're sitting at the 50-yard line trying to create an anti-gravity football to chuck into the end zone.
All right, I love your passion. I love your passion. No, I'm 100% with you. But you brought in VC into the company. So how do you communicate this to your board?
We communicated to the board by being realistic, of saying, hey, look, we have a product, it's relevant to the commercial market, here's where the DoD is using it, here's where the DoD is actually doubling down onto a production track contract and moving forward. And we're lucky, we have Google Ventures, we have some of the best venture capitalists in the world who have had that scar tissue, but are still able to go invest behind a real meaningful capability beyond sort of the innovation theater.
I love that. And we talked about patience earlier today on the VC panel. I think another dissonance that exists in the investor community is, what do exit scenarios look like? Maybe, I think as we shift more towards this, like, let's call it hardware augmentation, rather than just is it hardware or is it SaaS? How are you, maybe you're still on the digital side of things. How do you Is it as big of an issue for you? I mean, you're dealing with a lot of open source code. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got a great path that's been blazed for us by Palantir, who has pointed to a nice exit scenario here. Obviously, if you raise significant VC at scale, there's only one exit that looks good, right? Which is you're taking this out to the public markets. And if you're doing that with defense customers, that means that you really have to get proper sustainment dollars. You have to be on palms. You've got to actually have what is considered to be a leading edge solution in your particular vertical if you're going to win. And so that is a long journey that if you're working with defense-oriented investors, people who can go the mile with you and have seen the scar tissue develop, they'll follow that journey with you, right? And they're not going to be totally concerned about the hardware versus software distinction, the digital versus non-digital. They're really concerned about, are you actually creating deep value for your customer in a way that's going to reproduce and scale? And that's a place where if you are partnered with the right people inside DoD who are trying to actually drive meaningful, lasting improvements in capabilities for the warfighter, yeah, there's a good case that you can get this thing out and go the distance.
Van, would you mind if I commented on something that Matt said? So I love the passion too, actually. He mentioned innovation theater, and I suspect that means different things to different people, but in a big picture, I think we all kind of get what it is. Here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're a company out there that's working with DoD, which I hope there's a bunch of you out there, because I actually believe that the greatest thing we have in America, period dot, is our innovation nature, our innovation culture. And we have real problems like Matt described with a near peer competitor called China. And we will lose to them if we ever don't have this innovative nature and companies like yours willing to work with the government. You do not want China. I spent about 12 years of my career in numerous war games where we war gamed against China. So I'm pretty smart on China, I guess. I'm not expert on many things, but on that thing I'm pretty smart on. You do not want to live in a world where China is a superpower and America is not. That's for sure. So now to innovation theater. So in my mind, if your company is out there on whatever contract it is, you mentioned SBIR, which is actually a really good contract because it gives you, it gives the government sole source authority. You want to make a contracting officer's job easier, bring them a SBIR and ask them to take you to a phase 3. They probably still will fight you on it, but it'll be the easiest thing they do if they decide to do it, right? But in the end, if you're a company that is working with the government and you're not, and you do not know if they're actually seeking long-term funding for your capability, welcome to Innovation Theater. You're taking part in it, okay? You need to find that out. You need to ask those kinds of questions. What's the long-term play here? Are you competing for money in the palm, so I'm going to have 30 years worth of funding. People think it's 5 years worth of funding. It's really 30 years worth of funding in the palm. They laid in for 30 years. By the way, if I was a venture capitalist and there was some company that I knew was going in to be a program, I'd take a hard look at them.
I've seen that and I can relate to this. I've seen that in the space industry, and some might say we were made a lot of promises, and not a lot of them happened, and some of them had that early traction, and they didn't transpire the way we thought we would, especially with government contracts, even though SpaceX is out there still winning tons of contracts. Other companies are still waiting to get operational, but I'm worried about that velocity that has impeded in space now starting to happen in defense. And I don't want people to get disillusioned by saying, just because I want a SBIR phase, like a directive phase 2, I'm worthy of investor money, and now I'm hyping this up to a point where I can't keep my promise.
Right, there's going to be winners and losers, no doubt. And the winners are the ones that get long-term money.
So I think there are two key things. If I were going to ask, whether we call it the innovation theater, the innovation community, and venture community, there are two things we can focus on that would help accelerate the cycle of commercialization, innovation, getting things that we're investing in all the way to a program. Right? One is really focusing on demand. This should not just be the responsibility of companies to identify product market fit. It's just as much a responsibility of the government, because government is so complex, the DoD bureaucracy. Most people inside the DoD don't know what's happening, right? And so I can tell you, for instance, in advanced manufacturing, there are 320 plus programs investing in advanced manufacturing. You ask anybody inside of government, they don't know that. They shouldn't be expected, but we're not investing time to really understand that, right? There's over 9,000 total program offices that have invested 80% of the money that I was talking about, right? We don't know that information. We need to put that in the hands of every innovation manager, right, that who's trying to shepherd a company through. The second big thing is we keep talking about bringing non-traditionals, bringing new companies in. We've invested in 25 or 26,000, I forget the exact number, of companies over the past 5 years. We brought in unique companies based on our analysis, right? In 13 emerging tech areas, they cover all of DoD areas, for instance, that are. So 25,000, and these companies, so I'll take the advanced manufacturing example again. If you look at the commercialization funnel, we've done this analysis, 1,550 out of 2,087 companies are still at a very early stage, right? What are we doing to advance them? Then we have about 500 companies that are at the next stage, right? That are at the progressing, and there's about 100 companies that end up, there's a little bit of overlap, 100 companies that end up that are more mature, right? Nobody knows this. So we're talking about every venture capital firm needs to know this, right? Everyone needs to know this information, but we are instead focusing on what's the next program. So we are seeing a little bit of maturity in terms of the trend line, not as many new companies coming in, that plateauing, or the growth rate is slowing down. But there's more and more, as we talk more and more about the valley of death, there's more and more focus towards maturing companies. So so those are, I know it's a long answer, but two things, if we could do, focus on demand and focus on what companies we've already invested in and really help them match demand with those companies, right?
I want to circle it back to the audience here and the mission of Defense Ventures fellowships. The other issue we see on the flip side of that is people getting a taste of the private sector side, which is not indifferent to what we saw 20 years ago with the revolving door of government to like some of the major primes. But now that excitement is like going into the startups that are hosting these fellows. Often with other friends that I know in the audience, we've still seen that not translate well. What advice do you have about you can do more, not just being an innovation government person, but going back into government with that experience and being a bigger force on behalf of the acquisition officers and others that are out there? I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
I think we need to be doing more of this. So many of you guys know my colleague Dan Rickert, who was instrumental in doing a lot of this at Palantir and bringing a lot of veterans, sort of into Palantir, and making sure that we have defense. I think we have one or two of our Defense Ventures fellows sort of here today, where folks who are coming up through the ranks, who are actually understanding what large at-scale technology companies are willing to do and are what they're not willing to do, and be able to go work on those requirements to actually go solve for real problems versus trying to find hammers and nails, right? And being able to go do that, sort of one by one, truly finding those requirements from day one and getting those folks into those companies, which is, I think, a huge benefit of what Shift and everybody else has been doing. We need to do more of that, where we're actually focused on finding problems that give us an asymmetric advantage over our enemies. And we need to do less hand-wavy. And I think what everybody in this room is doing here today is exactly a step in the right direction of getting those folks into those companies, collaborating and solving for those real problems that we owe to our warfighters to be successful.
Yeah, there's nothing like seeing these Defense Ventures fellows come in and bring in a pace of disruption when they head back to their home organizations that gives a real leg up for how those organizations are thinking about what is possible and how fast you can actually make, deploy, and really win in new problem categories. And I think more of these conversations that are happening, the better. The more interactions we have of that type, the faster and more competitive we can be.
We have 1 minute left. Maybe final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll answer your question. I actually think if we could do, and I'm going to try to advocate for some of this within our own Air Force, if we could do more Defense Ventures fellows, it'd be all the grander. I've been working with Tim Nolan here, while he was, in fact, both while he was on active duty and then, he came to my company after he got off. But he was in the first Defense Ventures Fellows class. And the number of companies that he has, helped get in and start doing their thing in the government is not in the tens, not in the 20s. I think it's in the hundreds, right? I mean, what he's done is amazing, and he's just one Defense Venture Fellow I know about. But if you're getting that kind of payback, even if you're getting a 5x payback, this is well worth the money. So we need to do more of these kinds of things. More of the kind of things of having Defense Venture Fellows that are doing that and coming back to the service. And I love the fact that when they leave the service, they'll actually come back and help. But I want to hear what you have to say. So you get the last few
Now,
minutes.
I'll just say some of the best people I've hired in my previous companies as well came from government, came from defense. So thank you for all those who have served, and I think bring a great skill set. So I would encourage everyone. And I'm looking forward to having our company get involved. So
Yeah.
Thank you to all to our panelists. Appreciate everyone.